Welcome back to school, everyone. This year we're sharing paperwork changes and reminders through webinars. There are a total of 3 webinars for you to watch. It will take you about 45 minutes to watch all 3. After watching the webinars, you will need to complete the quiz. Please complete the quiz by September 5th. Register on Keep Certified for Due Process Updates class to receive 1 hour of continuing education credits. This webinar addresses changes and reminders related to IEPs. We'll discuss the new IEP update form. Its use is very similar to the old form. We'll then share a change in calculating the start date for services listed on page 5 of the IEP. Then, a reminder that you can't meet the last week of school and put off writing the IEP until fall. Next, the MCA modified for reading and math are no more. We have some paperwork changes to go with that. We'll also need to start inviting a representative from a student's resident district if they do not live in ISD 196 boundaries. We're using a new, easier form for the summary of performance completed when students graduate or age out of services. Next, a reminder regarding completion of progress reports in iPlan. Then, some more guidance on completing the service grid in iPlan, and a reminder about translating prior written notices into other languages. Lastly, we want to let you know about the communication log available in iPlan. First, we have revised the IEP update form. You can access the form through the Child Study Forms on the Special Education page of the staff intranet. Please note that we are in the process of rearranging the forms online by category. This should make it easier to find the forms you need. In the past, we have listed the names of IEP service providers on page 5 of the IEP and then sent an IEP update form to parents when the service provider names changed. We will no longer be listing service provider names on IEPs, only service provider titles. This provides more flexibility for staff when there are changes in service providers. However, it is important that parents know the names of staff working with their children. Please send home the revised IEP update form or an introductory letter at the beginning of the school year so that parents have your contact information. Please notify parents of any changes that occur during the school year. This documentation does not need to be copied and placed in the student's special education file. On page 5 of the IEP, you list the proposed start date of services. The way we calculate this date changed a few years back, and it's changing again. The law defines the amount of time we have to write an IEP only as a reasonable time. The state has typically defined this as 10 days. We're going back to 10 school days to write the IEP. However, please avoid holding meetings right before long breaks whenever possible, so that there is not a delay of several weeks between the meeting and when the parents see the paperwork from the meeting. It is very important that the start date be at least 14 days after the IEP and prior written notice are sent to parents. This is specified in law. We check the date of the prior written notice and count out 14 days. The start date must be after this date. Another change. In the past, we've said to list the start date as whatever day falls 28 days after the meeting, even if that day falls on a Sunday or in the middle of winter break. Many of you said that that didn't make sense. We recognize this, and it is acceptable to move the start date to the next school day if it falls on a non-school day when you count it out. This includes moving the start date to the first day of school for IEPs written at the end of May. This isn't the best time to remind you of this, I know. However, a friendly reminder that while you do have 10 school days after a meeting to write the IEP and send it to parents, this does not apply over summer break. There is a law that requires that we have IEPs in place the first day of school for students we know to have disability. The federal government has required that Minnesota stop administering the MCA modified. Thus, this will no longer be an option for students tested this school year. Please ensure that your students' IEPs do not say that they will be taking the MCA modified. If you have IEPs that do include this, it is okay to make the change when you write the new IEP, so long as the new IEP is due before winter break. We need to order test materials by then. So if the annual IEP is not due until after winter break, the IEP team will need to follow significant change procedures to change the IEP before then. It is an IEP team decision, not just a case manager decision, as to whether the student will take the MCA or MTAS. The vast majority of students who took the MCA modified will now take the MCA. Remember that the MTAS is only an option for students with significantly impaired cognitive functioning. Next, there is no longer a need to include a statement in the PLAF that the student will not meet grade level expectations during the IEP year. Finally, the assessment staff will be offering training September 26th and October 10th on state and district testing and available test accommodations. Watch for more information soon. We are obligated by law to give resident districts a voice in the services we provide for their students. Therefore, when a student does not live within our school district boundaries, we will need to include the special education director of the resident district on the notice of a team meeting. It does not matter if student is attending school in our district by parent or resident district decision. Most of the time, no representative from that district will attend your meeting. Except in cases with complex students placed here by other districts, do not attempt to contact this person to choose the meeting date and time. Choose the date that works for your team and parents. Child study secretaries are still completing notice of team meetings. Your child study secretaries will identify out-of-district residents and will have a list of special education director names and addresses. They will be sending a copy of the notice to the resident district. We complete a summary of performance for students when they graduate or age out of special education. We will be switching from our district form to the iPlan form. We have directions that we will share with our high school and transition staff this fall to help you use this new form. You will be able to cut and paste most information from existing documents to make completion of this form quick and easy. Progress reporting. If you haven't already, we expect that you'll complete your progress reports in iPlan this year. This saves a lot of cutting and pasting. When completing your progress reports in iPlan, you need to be sure to indicate whether the student will meet his or her goal by the next annual IEP date. This checkbox is listed once per goal, not with each objective. It's easy to miss. This is the same as the checkbox on the district form many of you used previously that indicated whether the student was making adequate progress towards their goal. This is a required IEP component and is something we monitor during file reviews. As always, if a student is not making progress, the IEP team needs to adjust the IEP or the student services so that the student has a chance of meeting the annual goal. The team should not wait until the next IEP to make changes. Progress reports are designed to be mid-year checks to ensure that services are enabling students to make progress. Lastly, we need to report progress on IEP goals and objectives. This is a change from what we've done in the past. MDE feels that if we're measuring it, we need to share progress with parents. You will find progress reporting boxes in iPlan connected to both the goal and the objectives. If an objective is not addressed during the trimester, it is okay to indicate objective not addressed this trimester. However, you must address at least one objective per progress report, and all objectives must be addressed during the course of the IEP year. Next, some tips for completing the service grid on page 5 of the IEP. We have added drop-down menus for service names in iPlan for you to use when completing page 5 of the IEP. It is essential that you use the choices in the drop-down menus. We need this consistency in order to run reports that coordinators use for staffing. We want to be able to count your students correctly. The service names are most likely a change for secondary staff who are used to listing classes in the service grid. Instead of class names, we need to list the type of service that is consistent with the student's IEP goal. For example, if the student has an organizational skills goal, the service is listed as organization/study skills, rather than a course name such as academic prep. Class names will be listed in the course of study section for students in grade 9 or higher. Middle schools may wish to clarify which services will be provided in which courses in the LRE statement when explaining to parents when their son or daughter will be educated outside the general education setting. Let's look at an example for more clarification. Here's a sample service grid to illustrate a few points. You'll notice that the services are aligned with IEP goals on the student's IEP. This student has a math goal and a daily math class in a special education setting. This IEP was likely written in the spring following a meeting on June 1st. Since counting out 10 school days plus 14 calendar days would put the start date sometime in the summer, the start date has been changed to reflect that these services will begin on the first day of school. The end date is 1 year from the date of the IEP meeting. This student has a writing goal. She is in a regular education English class with a special education teacher working with students on writing in this setting 4 times a week for 20 minutes. This student is also in a special education English class 5 days per week to address her reading goal. She also has goals in organizational skills and anxiety management. She is in an academic prep class with her case manager to work on organization and managing her anxiety. This is reflected on the service grid in 2 separate lines. One that shows that about 40 minutes a day are spent on organization and time management, while about 15 minutes a day are spent on strategies to manage her anxiety. Related service providers such as speech, occupational therapy, and DAPE will find service categories that are similar to what they have used in the past. Note that there are different options for speech and language services. This student receives language services 1 time a week for 55 minutes. This student is also in extended school year. Be sure to include extended school year when completing your service grid. If you work in a transition program or send students to transition programs, be aware that services are listed differently than in other secondary buildings. However, the services will be listed very similarly to the way they have been listed for the past few years. Since we have transition programs in more than one building, we will first list the building, Transition Plus or Dakota Ridge, then we will list the area of transition, employment, post-secondary education and training, or independent living. If students are served in a center-based program or Dakota Ridge full-time, there is no need to break down their services by goal area. The exception to this would be related service providers such as speech, OT, DAPE, etc., which would be listed separately as they always have been. When listing services for students in center-based programs, we ask that you list the service as center-based - area of student's primary disability. So, a student in a CID program would likely receive services as center-based - ASD, and a student in the Dakota Ridge Sun program might receive services as Dakota Ridge - DCD - SP. We will not list the name of the center-based program in the service grid. However, we would like you to clarify which center-based program the student attends in the LRE. For example, Johnny will receive the majority of his services in the special education program for students with communication interaction disorders, CID, or Amy will receive the majority of her services in the special education program for students with developmental cognitive disabilities, DCD. This could also be worded as students with severe disabilities, in parentheses SPMI, or in the Special Education Communication Interaction Program, parentheses SIP, or students with emotional behavior disorders, parentheses EBD. You get the pattern. All right, moving on. We have students spending part of their day in 2 different schools. We want to be clear about which services will be provided at which school. We can describe this in a parent-friendly language in the LRE. In the service grid, list the service provided and then identify each service provider's school. For example, Dakota Ridge Special Education Teacher and Apple Valley High School Special Education Teacher. Let's look at an example. This student spends 2.5 hours at Dakota Ridge in the morning and then heads to Apple Valley High School to take a special education math class, a class with DCD students designed to teach functional skills, and then participates in a work experience class back at Dakota Ridge. I can identify the school by the school listed with each service provider. Just a reminder that last spring we shared directions for translating prior written notices into the family's native language. If you click on the form number in the slide above, you'll be able to read the directions. Remember that you do need to translate prior written notices into the family's language if they are not able to read English. We do have the forms themselves translated into several languages, so you'll usually be asking for translation of your responses to the 5 prior written notice questions.
I'm going to stop you there and I'll cut that out. They can't click this when it becomes a movie.
Okay.
Okay? So start this one again.
Okay.
They won't be able to click this unless you're sending them the PowerPoint.
So how can we make it so that they can just look up the form?
Right.
What I need to say? Okay.
Yep.
There was another one like that at the beginning.
I didn't catch that.
Okay, we'll need to redo that one.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just start the slide over.
Yep, go.
Okay. Just a reminder that last spring we shared directions for translating prior written notices into the family's native language. If you look at Form SCS-8 in the Child Study Forms, you will be able to review the directions for this process. Remember that you do need to translate prior written notices into the family's language if they are not able to read English. We do have the forms themselves translated into several languages, so you'll usually be asking for translation of your responses to the 5 prior written notice questions. Prior written notices need to be translated when parents do not read English. If they tell you they can read English but speak another language, it is okay to give them the form in English. If parents do not speak English as their first language, please ask them what language they would like forms translated into. If they do not read their native language, if their native language is an oral and not a written language, or if their native language is so rare in this area that we cannot find a translator, we would not be expected to translate the form. We would then work to find oral interpretation for the family. When parents do not speak English as their native language, it is best to document under prior written notice question number 5, other factors considered, that you consider the parents' language preferences and detail what language parents requested. Please note that the notice of team meetings also need to be sent in the parent's native language. Notices can be found in other languages on the MDE website. Your Child Study Secretary will assist you in accessing these forms. You can use a program such as Google Translate to help you fill in the boxes. Be sure that when using Notice of Team Meeting forms in other languages that you fill in the boxes in the language the form is in. iPlan has a communication log available for your use. To access it, click on the icon that looks like a phone next to the student's name in your MyPlan screen. The icon also appears in the upper left corner when you are working in a student file. This will pull up a screen for you to log the information from the contact. Please print a copy of the communication and give to your Child Study Secretary so they can put it in the Child Study file for the student. There are advantages to using iPlan to log communications with parents. You can view communication for previous years as well as the current year. You can also view all communication on one screen. We hope you'll enjoy this convenience. This concludes this presentation.